Gregory Walker stepped onto the private dock of the island resort with his arm wrapped confidently around Tiffany Morgan, leaving his wife, Faith Cook, to follow several steps behind. Before relatives, guests, and resort staff, he smiled, as if the humiliation were perfectly ordinary. His mother praised Tiffany as the woman who truly belonged at his side. While Gregory instructed an employee to move Faith's luggage to a smaller villa because important guests come first, Faith neither argued nor protested. She simply watched. None of them realized that every villa, every beach, every dock beneath their feet belonged to the quiet woman they had just pushed aside. If you believe dignity is measured by how someone treats others, when no one seems to be watching, share where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories about quiet courage, truth, and justice speak to you, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey. Faith Cook had never believed that wealth revealed a person's true character. In her experience, it concealed it. Long before she became the silent owner of one of the most exclusive island resorts on the eastern coast of the United States, but she had watched her father build an empire that almost no one associated with the Cook family name. Richard Cook had preferred investment funds, trusts, and carefully structured holding companies over magazine covers and televised interviews. He often reminded his daughter that the strongest position in any negotiation belonged to the person nobody noticed until the documents were signed. Faith remembered every word. When Richard died unexpectedly 5 years earlier, his private trust transferred controlling ownership of Cook Coastal Holdings into Faith's hands. The company did not advertise itself as a luxury resort brand. Instead, it quietly owned development firms, hospitality groups, transportation services, and the island resort that welcomed celebrities, executives, judges, diplomats, and business leaders throughout the year. Only 3 people knew the complete ownership structure. Faith. Daniel Cook, the family's longtime attorney despite sharing no family relationship. And William Harris, chairman of the holding company's board. Everyone else answered to corporate entities whose names appeared on official paperwork but revealed nothing about the individual who ultimately made every major decision. Faith wanted it that way. She continued driving the same modest sedan she had owned before inheriting the company. She continued wearing simple clothing. She still preferred neighborhood cafes to exclusive clubs. Even when board meetings required her presence, she usually joined through encrypted video conferences with her camera turned off after legal verification. Power, she had learned, required discipline more than display. Her husband never questioned any of it. Gregory Walker believed he understood exactly who his wife was. To him, Faith was intelligent enough to manage their household finances, dependable enough to remember birthdays and family obligations, and quiet enough never to interfere with his career. He appreciated those qualities in the same casual way someone appreciated reliable furniture, useful, familiar, and rarely worthy of admiration. His own career had flourished during the past several years. As marketing director for Horizon Elite Travel, Gregory had become increasingly visible in luxury tourism circles. His presentations attracted investors. His promotional campaigns won industry awards. His confidence expanded with every professional success until it quietly transformed into certainty. He no longer believed he was fortunate. He believed he deserved everything he had. Whenever colleagues congratulated him, Gregory accepted the praise, without mentioning the countless evenings Faith had quietly supported him. She had reviewed presentations when he was exhausted. She had organized financial records during difficult years. She had listened patiently whenever projects failed. She never asked for recognition. Eventually, Gregory stopped noticing her contributions altogether. The narrator already knew where that path would lead. People who mistake silent support for permanent dependence often fail to recognize the moment they become completely alone. Several floors above Gregory's office worked Tiffany Morgan. At 29, Tiffany possessed remarkable confidence and an instinctive understanding of ambitious men. She dressed elegantly, spoke persuasively, and rarely entered a conversation without calculating what she hoped to gain from it. Gregory initially admired her professionalism. Business lunches gradually became longer. Conference trips became opportunities. Private messages replaced formal emails. Neither of them described the relationship honestly, even to themselves. Gregory insisted his marriage had simply grown distant. Tiffany convinced herself that she was helping him find happiness. Reality required fewer words. They were having an affair. Faith noticed changes long before anyone imagined. Gregory no longer looked at her during dinner conversations. His business trips became unexpectedly frequent. New cologne appeared on shirts she had not purchased. Credit card statements reflected expensive restaurants he never mentioned. Still, she never confronted him. She asked no dramatic questions. She searched no phones. Instead, she observed. Observation had always been her father's first lesson. Facts carried greater weight than emotions. Quiet evidence survived, where angry accusations often failed. Daniel Cook understood that better than anyone. Unlike Gregory, Daniel met Faith every month to discuss investment reports, board resolutions, regulatory compliance, and long-term expansion strategies. Their conversations rarely lasted more than an hour, but every decision affecting billions of dollars ultimately required Faith's approval. On one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Daniel entered a private conference room carrying several organized folders. "The quarterly reports are excellent," he said. "Occupancy rates exceeded expectations again." Faith reviewed the summaries without unnecessary celebration. "And the island?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Still our strongest performing property." He placed another folder on the table. "The annual board meeting will take place there next month. William wants every director present in person." Faith nodded. "I'll attend." Daniel hesitated before opening another file. "There is one additional matter." Faith looked up. "Gregory," Daniel answered with quiet professionalism. "I've received several photographs from hospitality staff. They weren't requested by you. Employees simply believed they might eventually become relevant." Faith accepted the envelope. Inside were several photographs. Gregory leaving restaurants with Tiffany. Gregory holding Tiffany's hand outside an airport. Gregory embracing her before entering a hotel. None of the images surprised Faith. She studied each photograph carefully before placing them back into the envelope. "No public scenes?" she asked calmly. Daniel understood exactly why she asked. "Nothing that would create legal complications yet." Faith closed the folder. "Keep everything. Without action, without action." Daniel never questioned her judgment. Years representing the Cook family had taught him that Faith rarely reacted immediately. She prepared. Outside the conference room, life continued as usual. Employees hurried through hallways, phones rang, meetings filled calendars. No one passing the closed door could have guessed that the quiet woman reviewing financial statements possessed authority over thousands of employees and assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars, least of all Gregory. That evening, he returned home later than usual. "I had another strategy meeting," he explained while loosening his tie. Faith simply nodded. "Dinner's in the oven." Gregory thanked her distractedly before checking messages on his phone. Across the dining table, silence settled comfortably between them. To Gregory, it felt ordinary. To Faith, it felt revealing. The absence of conversation often exposed more truth than arguments ever could. Later that night, after Gregory had fallen asleep, Faith walked into her home office. She opened a secure laptop that never connected to their household network. Several encrypted emails waited for her attention. One contained updated financial statements. Another required approval for environmental restoration funding around the island's coral reefs. A third came from Daniel. Annual board meeting confirmed. Location Seabrook Island Grand Resort. Attendance mandatory. Faith read the message twice before typing a brief reply. Approved. Maintain existing confidentiality procedures. My identity remains undisclosed unless I authorize otherwise. She pressed send. Outside the window, the city lights reflected across the dark water. In only a few weeks, she and Gregory would travel to the island together. He believed he was planning a family vacation. She already knew it would become something else entirely. Not because she intended revenge, but because truth, when patiently documented and presented through proper legal channels, had a way of arriving exactly when it could no longer be ignored. By the time spring settled across the East Coast, Gregory Walker had already announced what he described as the perfect family getaway. "We all deserve a break," he said one evening while scrolling through his tablet. "Work has been non-stop. A week on Seabrook Island will do everyone good." Faith looked up from the book resting on her lap. "Your mother is coming." Gregory nodded without looking at her. "Linda wouldn't miss it. She already invited my sister and her husband for part of the trip." Faith smiled politely. "That sounds nice." Gregory finally glanced at her. "I've also invited someone from work." Faith waited. "Tiffany." He spoke the name as though it required no explanation. "She helped close the Harper Resorts campaign. She's been under a lot of pressure lately. Think of it as rewarding a valuable colleague." Faith held his gaze for several seconds. "Will anyone else from your office be joining us?" "No." "So she'll be traveling alone?" Gregory shrugged. "She's independent." The conversation ended there. Faith asked nothing more. Gregory interpreted her silence as acceptance. The narrator understood it differently. Silence was never the absence of thought. It was often the beginning of careful observation. Later that night, Gregory stepped outside onto the back patio to answer a phone call. He believed Faith had already gone upstairs. Instead, she remained in the kitchen quietly washing a single coffee mug while the slightly open patio door carried fragments of his conversation into the room. "Don't worry." A pause. "It'll only be a few more weeks." Another pause. "After this trip, everything will be easier." His voice softened. "I promise." Faith could not hear Tiffany's responses. She did not need to. She dried the mug, placed it carefully inside the cabinet, and returned to her office. There she opened a leather notebook. Unlike digital files that could be altered or questioned, the notebook contained handwritten entries dating back nearly 2 years. Every page followed the same disciplined format: date, time, observation. No speculation, no emotional commentary, only facts. She added another line: April 8th, 8:47 p.m. Gregory confirmed Tiffany Morgan will accompany family vacation. Private phone conversation immediately afterward. Mentioned only a few more weeks. She closed the notebook. Nothing more. The following afternoon, Daniel Cook called through the secure number reserved exclusively for trust matters. "The board has finalized its schedule," he said. Faith listened quietly. "The annual governance meeting will begin on Thursday morning." "During our vacation?" "Yes." "Who requested the timing?" "William." Faith thought for a moment. "He enjoys conducting inspections while the resort is fully operational." "Exactly." Daniel paused before continuing. "There is something else." "I'm listening." "Our compliance department has completed another internal review." Faith waited. No irregularities involving the company. But, Daniel chose his words carefully, marketing personnel from Horizon Elite Travel have occasionally represented themselves as having special authority within the resort. Faith immediately understood. Gregory, we cannot confirm he acted intentionally. Do we have documentation? Emails, guest reports, reservation requests, recorded communications. Faith remained silent. Daniel continued. So far, nothing reaches the level of litigation. Keep collecting. As always, when the call ended, Faith walked toward the large window overlooking the city skyline. Many executives believed ownership meant giving orders. Her father had taught her something entirely different. Ownership meant responsibility. It meant allowing legal procedures to develop completely before acting. Premature action created unnecessary conflict. Complete evidence created resolution. 3 days later, Gregory announced another change. We're flying separately. Faith looked surprised. Separately? My schedule changed. When? This morning. Faith nodded. What about Tiffany? Gregory answered too quickly. She'll probably be on the same flight as me. Probably. You know how business travel works. Faith smiled gently. I'm sure I do. Gregory missed the quiet irony in her answer. Few people understood business travel better than the woman who personally approved transportation budgets for multiple hospitality companies. That evening, after Gregory left for another late meeting, Faith opened the shared travel folder on the family computer. Everything appeared normal. Round-trip tickets, hotel confirmations, ground transportation, family activity reservations. Nothing unusual. Then she opened the airline's online reservation portal. Her own reservation appeared exactly as expected. Gregory's reservation did not. His seat assignment had changed. A second reservation appeared under the same corporate booking number. Passenger Tiffany Morgan. Adjacent seats. Outbound flight. Return flight. Priority boarding. Executive lounge access. Faith closed the web page without taking screenshots. Instead, she logged into the secure evidence archive maintained by Daniel's office. She created a brief note requesting preservation of publicly accessible booking records should they later become relevant. No accusation, no complaint, only preservation. The following weekend, Linda Walker arrived for dinner carrying several shopping bags. I bought new dresses for the island, she announced cheerfully. Gregory laughed. You'll outdress everyone. Linda smiled proudly before noticing Faith preparing dinner. You aren't buying anything new. Faith shook her head. I already have everything I need. Linda exchanged an amused look with Gregory. That's always been your problem, Faith. Faith turned from the stove. My problem? You never think big. Gregory chuckled softly. Mom means you don't enjoy luxury. Linda continued. Imagine spending a week surrounded by wealthy people while dressing like you're running errands. Faith simply smiled. I'll be comfortable. Linda sighed dramatically. Comfort isn't everything. Faith quietly returned to cooking. The narrator already knew something Linda could not possibly imagine. Many of the wealthy guests she admired had personally shaken Faith's hand during board meetings over the years. Some had negotiated directly with her. Others had requested private investment partnerships. Not one of them knew she preferred simple sweaters over designer labels. Status announced itself loudly. Confidence rarely needed to. The week before departure, Gregory became unusually attentive to his appearance. New luggage, new sunglasses, an expensive watch. Faith noticed each purchase. She also noticed none had been discussed beforehand. Again, she recorded facts. Nothing more. Meanwhile, preparations on Seabrook Island continued. General Manager Michael Reynolds reviewed arrival schedules with department heads, VIP guests, corporate delegates, board members, security teams. Finally, one confidential file: owner arrival. Michael closed the folder before anyone else entered the meeting room. Only Sophia Bennett remained after everyone had left. "She's really coming in person?" Sophia asked quietly. Michael nodded. For the first time in nearly 3 years. "Does the staff know?" "Only senior management," Sophia smiled. "They'll be excited." "They won't know until she allows it." Michael looked toward the ocean outside the conference room windows. "Our responsibility is simple. Treat Mrs. Cook exactly as instructed. No special announcements, no public recognition, no unnecessary attention." Sophia nodded, as always. Neither of them imagined how difficult that instruction would become. Back in the city, Faith packed her suitcase with remarkable simplicity. Comfortable dresses, walking shoes, a notebook, a tablet containing encrypted corporate files. Nothing that hinted at extraordinary wealth. Before closing the suitcase, she placed one additional item inside: a slim leather folder. It contained no divorce papers, no accusations, no demands. Only copies of documents Daniel had advised her to keep readily available should legal circumstances unexpectedly require them. She hoped the folder would never leave her luggage. Experience had taught her that hope and preparation could exist together. On the morning before departure, Daniel sent one final encrypted message: "Everything is ready. The board meeting agenda has been approved. Confidentiality remains intact." Faith replied with only 3 words: "Thank you, Daniel." She zipped her suitcase closed. Across the hallway, Gregory was laughing at a message that had just appeared on his phone. He smiled in a way Faith had not seen directed toward her in a very long time. He believed the island vacation would mark the beginning of a happier future. Faith knew it would mark the beginning of something far more permanent. Not because she intended to expose him, but because the truth was already traveling toward the island alongside every passenger, every reservation, every email, and every legal document waiting quietly for the right moment to be opened. The private ferry approached Seabrook Island just after sunrise, cutting through calm Atlantic waters that reflected streaks of gold across the horizon. From a distance, the island looked almost untouched, lush green palms swaying behind stretches of white sand. Elegant stone villas nestled among flowering gardens, and a marina filled with polished yachts that belonged to guests who valued privacy more than publicity. For Gregory Walker, the view represented success. For Faith Cook, it represented responsibility. She had first visited the island as a teenager with her father long before it became one of the country's most exclusive luxury resorts. Richard Cook had walked its beaches with blueprints instead of cameras speaking more about conservation than profit. "If we ever own a place like this," he had told her years ago, "our greatest investment won't be the buildings." Faith had asked what he meant. "The people who trust us enough to work here." She never forgot the lesson. The ferry docked smoothly against the private pier. Before any passenger had gathered their luggage, uniformed resort attendants were already waiting in perfect formation. Leading them stood Michael Reynolds, general manager of Seabrook Island Grand Resort. His posture remained calm. His expression remained professional. But the moment he saw Faith step onto the dock, something almost imperceptible changed in his eyes. Respect. Not surprise, not excitement. Respect. He took one measured step forward before stopping himself. Faith met his eyes for less than a second. A tiny movement of her head, almost invisible. "Do not acknowledge me." Michael understood immediately. He redirected his attention toward the arriving guests with practiced ease. "Welcome to Seabrook Island," he announced warmly. "We hope your stay will be both relaxing and memorable." Gregory smiled confidently as though the greeting were directed primarily at him. "Thank you," he replied. "I've heard excellent things about this place. We're honored to have you with us, Mr. Walker." Michael extended his hand politely. Gregory accepted it with the satisfaction of someone who enjoyed being recognized. Nearby, Sophia Bennett supervised the luggage team. She too recognized Faith instantly. Sophia had worked for the resort for nearly 12 years. She remembered the young woman who had quietly toured construction sites beside Richard Cook, asking thoughtful questions about employee housing, environmental protection, and emergency planning instead of luxury amenities. Years later, when ownership officially transferred after Richard's death, Faith had visited only twice. Both visits had been private. Both had left lasting impressions. She remembered every employee's name. She thanked kitchen staff individually. She asked housekeeping supervisors whether their workloads were reasonable. No one who met her forgot the experience. Sophia instinctively started walking toward Faith. Again, Faith offered the slightest shake of her head. Not now. Sophia immediately changed direction and began speaking with another arriving guest instead. Gregory noticed none of it. His attention had already shifted toward Tiffany Morgan, who stepped gracefully from the ferry wearing oversized sunglasses and an expensive white designer dress. "You made it," Gregory said with an easy smile. "I almost missed boarding," Tiffany laughed. Linda Walker approached with visible enthusiasm. "Tiffany, you look absolutely beautiful." "Thank you, Linda." Linda linked arms with her. "I told Gregory this vacation needed someone who appreciates luxury." Faith heard every word. She simply reached for her own suitcase. A young porter hurried over. "I can take that for you, ma'am." Before Faith could answer, Gregory spoke. "Take Tiffany's luggage first." The porter hesitated. There was nothing unusual about prioritizing guests, yet something about the instruction felt uncomfortable. Michael noticed the hesitation immediately. "Our team will take care of everyone's luggage," he said smoothly. "There won't be any delays." Faith offered the porter a gentle smile. "I'm perfectly capable of carrying mine." The young employee looked relieved. "Thank you, ma'am." Michael quietly memorized the exchange, not because it violated policy, because he had already seen enough to understand that Mrs. Cook's vacation was unlikely to remain peaceful. Luxury electric vehicles waited beside the marina to transport guests across the island. Gregory naturally climbed into the front vehicle. Without asking anyone's opinion, Tiffany slid into the seat beside him. Linda joined them in the second row. Faith arrived a few seconds later. Only one seat remained. In the back. No one apologized. No one offered to switch. Faith entered the vehicle without complaint. As they drove along winding roads lined with tropical gardens, Tiffany admired everything aloud. "This place is unbelievable." Gregory nodded proudly. "I told you it was worth coming." "I've never seen landscaping this perfect." Linda laughed. "Imagine owning property here." Gregory grinned. "Maybe one day." Faith looked quietly out the window. The narrator already knew the irony hanging unnoticed inside the vehicle. Gregory dreamed of one day owning property on an island that legally belonged to the woman sitting less than 3 feet behind him. The convoy stopped in front of the grand reception hall. Inside, senior staff waited to welcome arriving guests. Every employee had already received confidential instructions. Treat Mrs. Cook exactly like every other visitor unless she personally authorized otherwise. No exceptions. Michael escorted the family toward the reception desks. Our concierge team has prepared welcome packages. Gregory accepted his envelope immediately. Tiffany accepted hers moments later. Faith's envelope had been placed separately, not because it contained gifts, because inside rested a discreet card confirming that the annual board meeting documents had safely arrived in the secure executive office. Michael handed it to her without attracting attention. Their fingers touched briefly. He spoke in the same professional tone he used with every guest. "We hope everything meets your expectations." Faith opened the envelope casually. She glanced at the small card hidden beneath the resort map. Board documents secured. Confidential files awaiting your review. No signature, no company logo. No one else noticed. She folded the card and slipped it back into the envelope. "Thank you." Gregory barely looked in her direction. His attention had shifted again. "So, where's the presidential villa?" Tiffany asked excitedly. Michael answered politely. "It's located on the western shoreline. I saw pictures online. It's incredible. It is one of our finest residences." Tiffany smiled at Gregory. "I'd love to see it." Gregory laughed. "Maybe we'll get lucky." Michael remained expressionless. The presidential villa had never been assigned randomly. It remained permanently reserved whenever Faith visited the island. The reservation had already been confirmed weeks earlier. No one outside senior management knew that. As luggage carts disappeared toward the villas, Sophia quietly approached Michael. "Everything is under control," she whispered. "For now." Michael nodded. "Has Daniel arrived?" "His flight lands this afternoon. And Chairman Harris, tomorrow morning." Michael looked toward Faith, who stood several yards away, studying the ocean instead of joining the family's conversation. "She hasn't changed." Sophia smiled softly. "No. She still notices everything." Across the courtyard, Gregory wrapped an arm around Tiffany's shoulders while pointing toward the beachfront restaurants. Linda watched them with obvious satisfaction. Faith observed the reflection of all three figures in the polished glass entrance doors. She did not need to turn around. Reflections often revealed enough. She quietly opened the leather notebook she always carried during business travel. One brief entry. Arrival completed. Gregory displayed physical intimacy with Tiffany repeatedly in public areas before family members and resort staff. No attempt made to conceal relationship. She closed the notebook. No anger, no tears. Only another fact preserved. High above them, discreet security cameras continued recording every arrival into the resort's secure archive. They had done so every day for years. Today was no different. The difference lay only in who had arrived. The island welcomed thousands of visitors each season. Yet among everyone walking beneath the morning sun, only one guest possessed the legal authority to change the future of every person present. She carried no title badge, no security escort, no visible sign of ownership, only patience. And patience, the narrator knew, often became the most powerful witness when the truth finally chose to reveal itself. The concierge escorted the Walker family toward a shaded lounge overlooking the ocean, while the resort staff finalized villa assignments. Guests arriving at Seabrook Island Grand Resort rarely questioned where they would stay. Every reservation had been carefully arranged weeks in advance, with room categories determined by availability, privacy requirements, and long-standing policies. This family, however, would become an exception. Not because of the resort, because of Gregory Walker. Tiffany Morgan admired the elegant villas stretching along the coastline. "They're even more beautiful than the website." Linda Walker nodded enthusiastically. "I hope we're staying close to the beach." Michael Reynolds smiled politely. You've all been assigned oceanfront accommodations. Before he could continue, Tiffany pointed toward a magnificent white stone residence standing alone on a quiet bluff overlooking the sea. What about that one? Michael followed her gaze. The presidential villa, the largest private residence on the island. Its floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the morning sunlight, while a private infinity pool overlooked nearly a mile of untouched shoreline. Few guests had ever entered it. Even wealthy celebrities often reserved it months in advance. Michael answered carefully, "That residence is reserved." Tiffany tilted her head. "For whom?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss another guest's reservation." Gregory looked toward the villa with growing interest. "Is it occupied this week?" Michael maintained his professional expression. "It has already been assigned." Tiffany smiled playfully at Gregory. "I knew I should have booked earlier." Linda laughed. "Oh, Gregory knows enough people. Maybe something can be arranged." Gregory chuckled. "We'll see." Faith remained silent. She had personally approved keeping the presidential villa available during every annual board meeting. It provided privacy for confidential discussions and allowed her to work without interruption whenever she visited the island. She had never once considered it a symbol of luxury. It was simply where business was conducted. A few minutes later, a concierge distributed electronic room keys. Michael handed Gregory his packet. "Villa 12. Gregory nodded. Then Michael turned toward Faith. Before he could speak, Tiffany interrupted. "Actually." Everyone looked at her. She smiled with practiced sweetness. "I was wondering if Gregory and I could use the larger villa instead." The courtyard became unexpectedly quiet. Even several nearby employees paused for a fraction of a second. Gregory did not appear embarrassed. Instead, he spoke as though Tiffany's request were perfectly reasonable. "Faith doesn't really care about these things." Linda immediately agreed. "She's always preferred simple places." Tiffany looked toward Faith with an expression carefully balanced between politeness and superiority. "You wouldn't mind, would you?" Faith met her eyes. "What exactly are you asking?" "The larger villa. The presidential one." Gregory answered before Tiffany could. "It would make more sense." Faith waited. Gregory continued confidently. "Tiffany has important meetings online during the week." Faith asked quietly, "Business meetings?" "Yes." She nodded once. "If that's what you believe." Gregory interpreted the response as agreement. He turned back toward Michael. "We'll take the presidential villa." Michael did not move. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker. It isn't available." Gregory's smile faded. "I'm asking whether an exception can be made." "I'm afraid it cannot." Linda folded her arms. "Surely accommodations can be adjusted. Our policies are consistent for every guest." Gregory leaned slightly closer. "I'm sure management has discretion." Michael looked directly at him. "In certain matters." "And this?" "No." An uncomfortable silence followed. Tiffany forced a small laugh. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Gregory shook his head. "No." Then he looked toward Faith. "Tell him." Faith blinked. "Tell him what?" "That you don't mind switching. I haven't been assigned that villa." Gregory frowned. "But if someone else has it, surely they could move." Faith studied him carefully. "You're asking another guest to give up a reservation they booked long ago." "It's only a room," she answered softly. "It may be more than that." Gregory sighed impatiently. "You always overthink everything." Faith said nothing. The narrator understood that she was thinking far less about the villa than about Gregory himself. Years earlier, he would never have demanded another person's property simply because he wanted it. Success had not merely changed his habits, it had changed his assumptions. He now believed desire created entitlement. Michael's radio quietly crackled. A message from operations. The presidential villa had completed final preparations, exactly as scheduled. Everything awaited the owner's arrival. He acknowledged the message without revealing its meaning. Gregory noticed the radio. See? Someone's checking. Michael smiled professionally. Routine communication. Gregory wasn't convinced. I'm willing to pay extra. I'm afraid payment isn't the issue. Linda added, We're loyal customers. Michael nodded, and we appreciate that. But the reservation remains unchanged. Faith watched the exchange without expression. She could have ended the conversation with a single sentence. Instead, she remained exactly where she was. Not because she enjoyed watching Gregory fail, because revealing the truth now would accomplish nothing except satisfying wounded pride. That had never interested her. Tiffany finally stepped closer to Gregory. It's all right. We'll enjoy whichever villa we have. Her voice sounded gracious. Her eyes revealed disappointment. As the family prepared to leave the reception area, Sophia Bennett quietly approached Michael. The luggage team is asking where Mrs. Cook's belongings should go. Michael lowered his voice. Follow the original reservation. Sophia nodded. Understood. Faith overheard the exchange. She gently caught Sophia's attention. A tiny movement. Sophia approached. Yes, ma'am. Faith spoke quietly enough that no one else could hear. Please move my luggage to Villa 12. Sophia looked surprised. Your reservation. I know. But, Faith smiled kindly, it will make everyone's week easier. Sophia hesitated. The presidential villa has already been prepared specifically. Faith interrupted with another gentle smile. Please. Sophia understood. As you wish. Within minutes, confidential instructions changed. The presidential villa would remain vacant. Officially. No explanation would be provided. Meanwhile, Gregory unknowingly received exactly what he had wanted. Michael returned holding an updated room packet. Mr. Walker. Gregory looked up. There has been a scheduling adjustment. Tiffany's face brightened immediately. The presidential villa has become available. Gregory grinned triumphantly. I knew something could be worked out. Michael did not correct him. Linda laughed proudly. I told you. Gregory accepted the new key cards. Excellent service. Faith quietly accepted the replacement key for Villa 12. No one noticed, except Sophia. As luggage carts rolled toward their destinations, several longtime employees exchanged confused glances. One housekeeper whispered, Wasn't that villa always reserved? Another nodded. It was. So why the change? The supervisor answered gently. Because Mrs. Cook requested it. No further explanation was needed. Among senior staff, everyone understood exactly what that meant. If the owner chose inconvenience for herself, no employee would question the decision. The convoy reached the villas 20 minutes later. Tiffany stepped inside the presidential villa and gasped. This is unbelievable. Marble floors, handcrafted wood ceilings, private elevators, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic. A chef's kitchen, a wine cellar, an infinity pool stretching toward the sea. Gregory wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You deserve this. Faith heard the words while collecting her own suitcase from the smaller villa nearby. She neither slowed nor hurried. She simply carried the luggage inside. Villa 12 was elegant by any standard. 2 bedrooms, ocean views, a quiet garden, more comfort than most people would ever experience. Faith unpacked methodically. Laptop, notebook, corporate tablet, leather document folder, everything placed exactly where she preferred. A soft knock interrupted her work. Sophia stood outside holding a small envelope. "For you, Mrs. Cook." Faith accepted it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Chairman Harris arrives tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. Executive Conference Room secured. All confidential files ready for review." Faith folded the note. "Thank you." Sophia hesitated before speaking. "I'm sorry about what happened." Faith looked at her calmly. "You have nothing to apologize for." "They shouldn't have," Faith gently interrupted. "The resort followed my instructions." Sophia lowered her eyes. "Yes." Faith smiled warmly. "And you followed them perfectly." After Sophia left, Faith stepped onto the balcony overlooking the ocean. Farther down the shoreline, laughter drifted from the infinity pool of the presidential villa. Gregory and Tiffany were celebrating what they believed was a victory. Neither of them realized that every joyful moment unfolding inside that magnificent residence existed only because its true owner had quietly chosen to step aside. The narrator already knew something they did not. When a person mistakes another's kindness for weakness, every future decision becomes built upon a false foundation. And false foundations, no matter how luxurious they appear, rarely remain standing once the full weight of the truth arrives. The first full morning on Seabrook Island began with the quiet rhythm that distinguished truly exclusive resorts from ordinary luxury destinations. There were no loud announcements, no crowded breakfast buffets, no lines of impatient tourists. Instead, fresh coffee appeared on private terraces before sunrise. Gardeners trimmed hedges while guests still slept. Sailboats drifted across calm blue water, and the sound of waves blended naturally with birds hidden among palm trees. Everything seemed peaceful. Only appearances, however, were peaceful. Inside the presidential villa, Gregory Walker stood on the balcony wearing a resort bathrobe, holding a cup of espresso while admiring the ocean. "I could get used to this," he said. Tiffany Morgan walked beside him with a satisfied smile. "You already look like you own the place." Gregory laughed. "Maybe someday." Neither of them noticed the quiet irony hidden inside those words. 100 yards away, Faith Cook sat alone on the terrace of Villa 12 with a simple breakfast, fresh fruit oatmeal, and tea. Her tablet rested beside her, not for entertainment, for work. Before leaving home, Daniel Cook had uploaded encrypted financial reports requiring her approval during the week. The first document summarized quarterly operating performance. Occupancy had exceeded projections. Employee retention had improved. Environmental restoration expenses remained below budget. Faith reviewed every page carefully. She did not rush. Every signature represented responsibility toward thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended upon thoughtful decisions. She electronically approved 3 investment proposals, deferred 1 expansion project pending additional research, requested clarification regarding a new vendor contract. Only after finishing did she begin eating breakfast. Most guests would never imagine that the quiet woman, sitting alone in a modest villa, had already made decisions affecting millions of dollars before 8 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, Gregory had entirely different priorities. At breakfast, Linda Walker enthusiastically praised Tiffany. "I've never seen anyone fit into luxury this naturally." Tiffany laughed modestly. "I've always appreciated beautiful places." Gregory smiled. It suits you. Faith quietly buttered a slice of toast. Linda glanced toward her. You've hardly said anything. I'm listening. Linda shook her head. You always do that. What? Watch everyone instead of enjoying yourself. Faith answered gently. I am enjoying myself. Gregory barely looked at her. You should loosen up. The narrator already understood the difference between them. Gregory believed vacations existed to escape responsibility. Faith believed changing locations never suspended responsibility. After breakfast, the family joined a guided sailing excursion organized by the resort. Captain Andrew Mills welcomed everyone aboard a 40-foot catamaran. As the boat left the marina, Tiffany positioned herself beside Gregory for photographs. Take one of us, she called to Linda. Linda eagerly accepted Gregory's phone. The resulting pictures looked less like business colleagues and more like a honeymoon couple. Faith stood near the opposite railing watching dolphins surface briefly before disappearing beneath the waves. She neither interrupted the photographs nor reacted to them. Instead, she quietly noticed something else. One of the onboard photographers had also captured every guest as part of the resort's standard promotional archive. Another fact, another timestamp, another independent record. Back on shore, Gregory suggested lunch at Ocean Crest, the resort's signature restaurant overlooking the cliffs. Reservations there normally required advance booking. The maitre d' welcomed the family warmly. We've prepared your table. As they followed him through the dining room, Tiffany slowed near a secluded terrace with panoramic ocean views. What about that table? The maitre d' answered politely. I'm afraid it's unavailable. Gregory looked toward the empty setting. But no one's sitting there. It has been reserved. For who? I'm not authorized to discuss guest reservations. Tiffany frowned. Everything here seems reserved. Gregory laughed. Someone important must be visiting. Faith quietly continued walking. That terrace remained permanently blocked whenever the resort owner conducted confidential lunches with board members. Again, Gregory unknowingly desired something already designated for the woman walking several steps behind him. Lunch began pleasantly enough. Fresh seafood, seasonal vegetables, homemade bread. Conversation drifted from travel to business. Gregory naturally became the center of attention. Our company is negotiating several new partnerships, he announced proudly. Linda beamed. I keep telling everyone my son works with the biggest names in luxury travel. Tiffany added, some resorts practically depend on Gregory's marketing campaigns. Gregory accepted the compliment easily. We've become influential. Faith listened quietly. Influential. It was an interesting word. Influence encouraged people. Ownership obligated them. Few appreciated the difference. Halfway through lunch, Gregory's phone vibrated. He excused himself to answer the call outside. Tiffany watched him leave before smiling toward Linda. He's incredible under pressure. Linda nodded enthusiastically. He deserves someone who truly understands his ambition. Faith calmly sipped her tea. Neither woman appeared embarrassed, speaking as though she were absent. When Gregory returned, he looked unusually pleased. Great news. What happened? Tiffany asked. The Harper Resorts campaign just received final approval. Linda applauded softly. I knew it would. Gregory smiled. The executives loved my presentation. Faith quietly asked, did your entire team receive recognition? Gregory shrugged. They helped, but the strategy was mine. Faith simply nodded. She remembered reviewing an early version of that same presentation months earlier. She had suggested simplifying several sections and reorganizing the market analysis. Gregory had accepted every recommendation. Now he no longer remembered where the ideas originated. Success often rewrote memory. That afternoon, the family visited the island's botanical gardens. Guests wandered shaded pathways lined with tropical flowers and centuries-old oak trees. Faith paused frequently to read educational signs describing native wildlife and conservation projects. A groundskeeper recognized her almost immediately. His name was Carlos Hernandez. He had worked on the island for nearly 20 years. Richard Cook had personally attended Carlos's daughter's college scholarship ceremony after the resort established its employee education fund. Carlos never forgot. He instinctively started walking toward Faith. She smiled warmly. Before he could speak, she subtly placed one finger against the side of her notebook. A familiar signal. Not here. Carlos immediately changed direction and began trimming nearby shrubs instead. Gregory noticed nothing. Tiffany, however, frowned slightly. That gardener looked at you strangely. Faith answered calmly, "Maybe he thought I looked familiar." Tiffany laughed. "I doubt it." Faith smiled politely. "So do I." The narrator knew that Tiffany had unknowingly dismissed one of the island's most loyal employees, someone who would have gladly worked his entire career under Faith's leadership. Late that afternoon, Daniel Cook arrived on the island. Unlike the Walker family, he did not check into a guest villa. Instead, he entered the executive administration building through a private entrance. Michael Reynolds greeted him with a firm handshake. "Welcome back." "Anything unusual?" Michael gave a restrained smile. "Mrs. Cook surrendered the presidential villa?" Daniel stopped walking. "Voluntarily?" "Yes." "For Gregory?" Michael nodded. Daniel sighed quietly. "That sounds exactly like her." Michael lowered his voice. "I don't understand why she keeps protecting him." Daniel answered with calm certainty. "She isn't protecting him." Michael looked puzzled. "Then what is she doing?" "Allowing him every opportunity to reveal who he truly is." Michael considered the answer. The longer he thought about it, the more accurate it seemed. That evening, Daniel reviewed confidential materials inside the executive conference room. Bank statements, corporate resolutions, ownership certificates, board agendas, compliance reports. Everything awaited Thursday's meeting. Everything remained legally complete. No emotional arguments, no dramatic surprises, only documented truth. At sunset, Faith walked alone along the beach. The tide rolled gently across the sand. She removed her shoes and carried them in one hand. For the first time since arriving, she allowed herself a slow, deep breath. Not because she felt defeated, not because she felt angry, because the ocean had always reminded her of her father. He used to tell her that waves never hurried. They simply arrived exactly when they were meant to. Far behind her, laughter echoed from the infinity pool of the presidential villa. Gregory and Tiffany toasted another perfect evening. Neither realized that cameras, reservation records, employee observations, emails, and financial documents were quietly accumulating into a complete picture. Faith was not creating that picture. She was merely refusing to interrupt it. And sometimes the narrator knew the strongest case was built not by adding evidence, but by allowing people to keep revealing themselves until there was nothing left to question. Fan 7. By the fourth day on Seabrook Island, routines had begun to settle into place. Guests recognized familiar faces at breakfast. Morning yoga classes gathered on the eastern beach. Golf carts moved quietly between villas beneath rows of palm trees. To almost everyone on the island, it appeared to be another flawless week at one of America's most prestigious resorts. Only a handful of people knew that an entirely different story was quietly unfolding beneath the polished surface. Faith Cook woke before sunrise as she always did. After a brief walk along the shoreline, she returned to Villa 12 and opened the encrypted tablet Daniel Cook had prepared before the trip. A new notification appeared. Executive board members confirmed arrival. William Harris had landed the previous evening. The remaining directors would arrive throughout the afternoon. Another message followed. Compliance Office requests final authorization for annual audit review. Faith read every page carefully before approving the request. The audit had been scheduled months before Gregory ever planned the vacation. Its timing was pure coincidence. Its consequences would not be. She closed the tablet just as someone knocked softly at the villa door. Sophia Bennett stood outside carrying a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Mrs. Cook." Faith smiled. "You didn't have to bring this." Sophia answered gently. The kitchen insisted. Faith understood. The staff wanted to show appreciation without revealing her identity. She accepted the tray. "Please thank them for me." Sophia hesitated. "There is another matter." Faith waited patiently. A server from the Ocean Terrace Cafe reported hearing a conversation yesterday. Faith remained silent. He thought legal should know. Between whom? Mr. Walker and Miss Morgan. Faith set her coffee cup down. "What was said?" Sophia carefully repeated the employee's written statement. Mr. Walker told Miss Morgan that once the vacation ended, he intended to file for divorce. Faith's expression remained unchanged. Sophia continued. "He also said that after the divorce, they would begin building a new life together." Faith nodded once. "Was anyone else present?" "2 employees, 1 guest, and another couple seated nearby." Faith considered the information. "Were any recordings made?" "No. Only written witness statements." Faith looked toward the ocean through the open window. "Please thank the employees. They did exactly what company policy requires." Sophia quietly left. Faith picked up her notebook. Another page, another entry, another fact. No accusation, no emotional response, only documentation. Across the island, Gregory and Tiffany rented bicycles for a ride along the coastal trails. Linda chose to spend the morning at the spa, leaving the 2 of them alone. "This place is incredible," Tiffany said, as they stopped near a scenic overlook. Gregory slipped an arm around her waist. "Wait until you see what comes next." She smiled. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking. About us." He nodded confidently. "I'm done pretending." Tiffany searched his face. "You mean it?" "I do." He looked toward the endless blue horizon. "Faith and I haven't really been married for years. We simply live in the same house." Tiffany reached for his hand. "So what happens after this trip?" Gregory answered without hesitation. "I'll meet with an attorney. We'll start the divorce." Tiffany smiled. "And then we'll finally have the life we deserve." She laughed softly. "I always knew you were meant for something bigger." Gregory's confidence continued growing. "You know what?" "What?" "One day I'll own a place like this." Tiffany looked around at the luxurious resort. "This? Something even better." He gestured toward the villas overlooking the sea. "I've spent years helping luxury resorts increase their revenue. I understand this business. People like me should own resorts." Not far away, 2 maintenance employees were replacing landscape lighting near the pathway. Neither intended to eavesdrop. Yet Gregory spoke loudly enough that several sentences reached them clearly. One employee exchanged a glance with the other. Neither said a word. They simply continued working. Years of employment at Seabrook had taught them one important lesson. If something seemed significant, report it. Never exaggerate. Never interpret. Simply report. That afternoon, one of those employees submitted a routine incident report to his supervisor. No opinions, only observations. Time, location, people present, approximate statements. The report reached Michael Reynolds less than an hour later. Michael read it twice. Then he picked up the secure internal phone. Daniel. Yes. I think you should read something. Within 20 minutes, Daniel sat inside Michael's office. He carefully reviewed the written report. When finished, he closed the folder. Has anyone spoken to Mrs. Cook? No. Good. Michael leaned back in his chair. This keeps getting worse. Daniel remained calm. No. Michael looked surprised. No. It keeps becoming clearer. There was an important difference. Evidence was valuable precisely because it accumulated naturally. No one had encouraged Gregory to speak. No one had trapped him. He had volunteered every word. Daniel placed the report inside the growing legal file. Maintain normal procedures. Michael nodded. As always, late that afternoon, Gregory and Tiffany joined Linda for drinks beside the infinity pool at the presidential villa. Crystal glasses reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. Music drifted quietly through hidden outdoor speakers. Linda raised her glass. To successful vacations. Gregory smiled. And new beginnings. Tiffany laughed. I like the sound of that. Linda glanced toward Faith's smaller villa in the distance. You know. Gregory looked at his mother. You've stayed patient long enough. He understood exactly what she meant. I know. Linda lowered her voice. Faith is a decent woman. But she isn't your future. Gregory looked toward the ocean. I've already made my decision. You've told her. Not yet. When? Soon. Linda nodded approvingly. Don't wait too long. You deserve happiness. Gregory believed every word. The narrator, however, already knew that Gregory had quietly begun confusing desire with justification. Instead of acknowledging his choices honestly, he had rewritten his marriage into a story where betrayal somehow appeared reasonable. Many people, when approaching an irreversible decision, first change the facts inside their own minds. Only afterward did they change their lives. As darkness settled across the island, Faith attended a confidential meeting inside the Executive Administration Building. Unlike the glamorous villas, the conference room reflected quiet professionalism. Large screens, legal files, financial reports, no unnecessary luxury. Daniel greeted her respectfully. Everything is ready. Faith reviewed the agenda. Quarterly financial performance, environmental initiatives, capital improvements, compliance review, annual governance vote, nothing unusual. Then Daniel opened another folder. I've added today's employee statements. Faith read them slowly. Neither witness had embellished anything. The wording remained factual, professional, objective, exactly as company policy required. Daniel watched her carefully. Would you like compliance to begin interviewing employees now? Faith shook her head. No. The statements are sufficient. What about Gregory? What about him? Daniel hesitated. He continues speaking openly. Faith closed the folder. Then let him. Daniel understood. Interrupting Gregory now might prevent him from making even more revealing choices. Patience remained the wiser strategy. Before leaving, Faith walked through the nearly empty executive hallway. Framed photographs lined the walls. Construction crews breaking ground years earlier. The first completed marina. Employees celebrating anniversaries, community charity events. Her father appeared in several pictures, always standing beside employees, never in front of them. Faith paused before one photograph showing Richard Cook shaking hands with gardeners after the resort opened. She smiled faintly. "You were right," she whispered. Power revealed character. Not only the character of the person who possessed it, but also the character of everyone who believed they were standing above someone powerless. Outside the island remained peaceful. Inside the presidential villa, Gregory laughed with Tiffany, believing the future belonged to him. Inside the executive offices, legal files quietly expanded with every passing day. Neither world had collided yet, but that they were moving steadily toward the same moment. And when they finally met, the truth would not arrive through anger, accusations, or revenge. It would arrive exactly as Faith had intended from the beginning. Thursday evening brought the most anticipated social event of the week on Seabrook Island. Every season, the resort hosted a formal sunset gala on the western beach, where guests gathered beneath white silk canopies as the sun disappeared into the Atlantic. Live string music drifted across the shoreline. Crystal lanterns illuminated winding wooden walkways. Tables decorated with fresh orchids overlooked the ocean, while chefs prepared an elaborate dinner featuring local seafood and seasonal specialties. For most visitors, the gala represented elegance. For the board members quietly arriving throughout the afternoon, it served another purpose: an opportunity to observe. William Harris never believed important decisions should be made only inside conference rooms. Character often revealed itself more honestly during ordinary conversations than formal presentations. As chairman of the holding company, he had spent decades studying people before trusting them with responsibility. This evening would offer many opportunities. Faith Cook arrived shortly before sunset, wearing a simple navy blue evening dress. There were no diamonds around her neck, no designer logos, no attempt to attract attention. Her hair rested naturally over one shoulder, and the only jewelry she wore was the thin gold watch that had belonged to her father. Several senior managers noticed her arrival. None approached. They remembered her instructions: treat her exactly like every other guest. Michael Reynolds quietly watched from the reception area, satisfied that every employee had honored those instructions perfectly. A few minutes later, Gregory Walker entered the gala with Tiffany Morgan on his arm. Linda Walker followed proudly behind them. Several guests naturally assumed Gregory and Tiffany were married. The confidence with which they carried themselves left little room for doubt. Gregory made no effort to correct anyone. Faith noticed. She simply continued walking toward her assigned table. The narrator already knew that silence once again would become far more revealing than confrontation. The gala began with cocktails served beside the beach. A violin quartet played softly while servers circulated among guests. Gregory accepted a glass of champagne. Tiffany stood close enough that their shoulders touched almost constantly. Linda smiled at them. "You two look wonderful together." Tiffany laughed. "Thank you." Gregory raised his glass. "Here's to successful partnerships." Faith heard every word from only a few feet away. She continued looking toward the horizon, where the final light of day disappeared beneath the ocean. Not far away, William Harris entered the event quietly. Very few guests recognized him. Those who did assumed he was simply another distinguished executive visiting the island. Michael greeted him discreetly. "Everything is prepared." William nodded. "And Mrs. Cook?" "She's here." William looked across the crowd until he found Faith standing alone near the water. As always, watching, listening, never demanding attention. He smiled faintly. "Her father would be proud," Michael agreed. "She has his patience." William answered thoughtfully. "Perhaps even more." Neither man approached her. The annual board meeting would begin the following morning. Tonight belonged to observation. Dinner service began just after sunset. The maitre d' escorted guests toward their assigned tables. Faith had been seated at a quiet table overlooking the beach. Gregory immediately frowned. "Tiffany should sit with me," the maitre d' answered politely. "The seating arrangements were finalized earlier today, sir." Gregory smiled impatiently. "Then change them." "I'm afraid I can't." Linda joined the conversation. "They're practically together all week anyway. Surely one chair isn't a problem." The maitre d' hesitated. Company policy prohibited changing several reserved tables because executives attending the board meeting had specific seating assignments. He glanced discreetly toward Michael. Michael walked over immediately. "Is there a concern?" Gregory answered confidently. "We'd like to rearrange seating." Michael reviewed the chart. "I'm sorry. The assignments need to remain as scheduled." Gregory sighed. This place certainly loves its rules. Michael smiled professionally. "We find consistency serves every guest equally." Faith quietly observed the exchange. She knew exactly why the seating mattered. William Harris had intentionally requested several placements to observe interactions among invited executives and guests. Changing them would affect the evening more than Gregory realized. As everyone finally took their seats, Gregory looked toward Faith. "Would you switch with Tiffany?" The entire nearby table became unexpectedly quiet. Faith looked up calmly. "You want me to leave my seat? It doesn't matter where you sit." "Tiffany should be beside me." Faith glanced toward the empty chair assigned to Tiffany several tables away. "She already has a seat." Gregory lowered his voice. "Don't make this difficult." Faith answered gently. "I'm not. You asked. I declined." Gregory's expression hardened. Linda leaned forward. "For goodness sake, Faith. It's one chair." Faith met her mother-in-law's eyes. "Then it should be equally easy to keep the original arrangement." Linda looked offended. "I've never understood why you insist on being stubborn." Faith returned her attention to the menu. She said nothing else. The narrator recognized something Gregory did not. For the first time that week, Faith had quietly refused a request, not from anger, from principle. She would no longer surrender something merely because someone demanded it. Unable to persuade her, Gregory simply dragged another chair beside his own table. Without asking permission, Tiffany sat next to him. Several nearby guests exchanged uncertain glances. The arrangement clearly ignored formal etiquette. William Harris noticed. So did Michael. So did 3 board members seated nearby. No one intervened. Observation remained more valuable than interruption. Throughout dinner, Gregory devoted nearly all of his attention to Tiffany. He complimented her dress, refilled her wine, laughed at every joke. Faith ate quietly while speaking occasionally with an elderly couple visiting from Boston. They discussed coastal conservation efforts and marine wildlife. The conversation felt unexpectedly peaceful. Several executives nearby quietly noticed that Faith listened far more than she spoke, exactly as Richard Cook once had. Dessert arrived just as a jazz trio began performing. Guests gradually moved toward the dance floor. Gregory immediately stood. He extended his hand toward Tiffany. "May I?" She smiled brightly. "I was hoping you'd ask." They walked together onto the polished wooden dance floor overlooking the ocean. Soft applause followed. Linda watched proudly. Faith remained seated. Across the room, William Harris quietly observed every movement. He did not need anyone to explain relationships. Body language often spoke with greater honesty than words. Halfway through the second song, Gregory returned briefly to the table. He looked directly at Faith. "I think you should head back to the villa." Faith looked up. "Why?" "This evening is becoming uncomfortable." "For whom?" Gregory glanced toward Tiffany, waiting on the dance floor. "I'd rather avoid unnecessary tension." Faith answered calmly, "I'm not creating any." Linda interrupted. "Faith, please, let them enjoy the evening." Several nearby conversations stopped. People pretended not to listen. Very few actually continued eating. Gregory spoke again. "I think it's better if you leave." Faith asked one final question. "Is that what you truly want?" "Yes." His answer came immediately. No hesitation. Faith looked at him for several silent seconds. Then she folded her napkin carefully and placed it beside her untouched coffee. "Very well." She stood, not hurriedly, not dramatically. She thanked the elderly couple for dinner, nodded politely toward the servers, picked up her small handbag, and quietly walked away. No accusations, no tears, no raised voice, only dignity. Sophia Bennett watched from the reception area. Her chest tightened as she saw Faith disappear into the darkness beyond the lanterns. She immediately contacted Michael through her earpiece. "Mrs. Cook has left." Michael looked toward William Harris. The chairman had also witnessed everything. William slowly set down his coffee cup. "Tomorrow morning," he said quietly. Michael understood. "The board meeting." William nodded once. "I believe everyone has now seen enough." Faith walked alone along the moonlit shoreline. The music from the gala faded behind her until only the sound of waves remained. She stopped near the edge of the water, removed her shoes, allowed the cool surf to wash over her feet. For the first time that week, she closed her eyes. Not because she wanted to escape, because she wanted complete clarity. Behind her, the gala continued. Laughter, music, champagne, dancing. Ahead of her, inside the executive conference room, rested ownership records, bank documents, trust agreements, board resolutions, and years of legally authenticated signatures waiting for morning. Faith knew something no one else on that beach understood. By this time tomorrow, the island would still be just as beautiful. The ocean would sound exactly the same. The waves would continue reaching the shore, but every relationship built upon false assumptions would begin to collapse not through revenge, but through undeniable truth presented exactly where it belonged. In a documented fact at a time, Friday morning arrived with flawless weather. The Atlantic lay almost perfectly still beneath a cloudless sky, and warm sunlight reflected across the marina where luxury yachts gently rocked against their moorings. Guests gathered for scuba excursions, fishing charters, and private sailing lessons, unaware that inside the executive wing of Seabrook Island Grand Resort, the most important meeting of the year was about to begin. Unlike the glamorous beachfront villas, the Executive Conference Center had no marble fountains or extravagant decor. Its value came from privacy. Biometric access controlled every entrance. Conference rooms were soundproof. Every meeting was recorded according to corporate governance requirements. Legal documents remained inside fireproof archives, protected by multiple authentication systems. For nearly 2 decades, every significant decision affecting the island had been approved within those walls. Today would be no different. Only the people attending would discover something they had never expected. At 7 o'clock that morning, Faith Cook was already awake. She reviewed the board agenda one final time while drinking black coffee on the terrace outside Villa 12. The documents had been organized with Daniel Cook's usual precision. Quarterly financial performance, environmental preservation projects, employee welfare initiatives, capital improvements, annual governance review, independent compliance report, election of board officers. Nothing unusual appeared on the schedule. That was intentional. The meeting itself had never been designed around Gregory Walker. It had been scheduled almost a year before he planned the family vacation. His presence on the island remained nothing more than coincidence. The consequences of that coincidence, however, were becoming increasingly unavoidable. Faith closed the leather folder. She looked toward the ocean for a long moment before quietly saying to herself, one step at a time. Not because she needed courage, because she believed every legal process deserved patience. Across the island, Gregory was enjoying a very different morning. Breakfast had been served on the terrace of the presidential villa. Fresh pastries, imported cheeses, seasonal fruit, freshly squeezed orange juice. Tiffany smiled across the table. I wish every vacation felt like this. Gregory laughed. It could. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, I'm serious. We've worked hard. We deserve a better life. Linda Walker joined them, carrying another cup of coffee. I've been thinking the same thing. She looked toward Gregory. When you finally move on, Gregory understood immediately. Things will change. Linda nodded. They should have changed years ago. Tiffany remained silent, but the smile on her face revealed exactly what she hoped those words meant. Gregory checked his watch. I've been invited to a corporate presentation this morning. Linda looked surprised. At the resort. Apparently, probably because of Horizon Elite travel. Tiffany looked impressed. I told you people notice your work. Gregory accepted the compliment without hesitation. He genuinely believed the invitation reflected his growing reputation in the hospitality industry. He never considered another possibility, but the invitation itself had arrived late the previous evening. It had been delivered politely by the concierge. Mr. Gregory Walker, you are cordially invited to attend this morning's Executive Hospitality Leadership Session. The wording had been intentionally broad. Daniel had approved it after consulting William Harris. No deception, no false statements. Gregory was indeed invited to attend. The letter simply omitted details regarding why. At 8:30, Gregory dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit. Tiffany adjusted his tie. You look like you belong in the boardroom. Gregory smiled confidently. I probably do. Linda laughed proudly. My son always lands where important decisions are made. None of them noticed Faith quietly leaving Villa 12 several minutes later. She wore a simple charcoal business suit and carried only a slim leather portfolio. No expensive jewelry, no visible symbols of authority. She looked less like the owner of a billion-dollar hospitality group than an experienced corporate attorney arriving for an ordinary meeting, exactly as she preferred. The Executive Conference Center stood on the northern side of the island, separated from guest facilities by carefully landscaped gardens. Security personnel greeted arriving executives with discreet professionalism. William Harris arrived first. Several directors followed. Independent auditors entered carrying sealed document cases. Outside legal counsel signed confidentiality confirmations before entering the building. Daniel Cook stood near the reception desk reviewing attendance. Everything proceeded precisely according to protocol. Then Faith arrived. Without fanfare, without announcement. Daniel nodded respectfully. Good morning. Good morning. Everything is ready. I expected nothing less. Before either could continue, another familiar voice interrupted. Mr. Cook. Gregory approached confidently. Daniel turned. Mr. Walker. Gregory smiled. I wasn't expecting to see attorneys this early. Daniel answered professionally. Corporate governance begins early. Gregory laughed. I suppose it does. He looked around the impressive conference facility. I've attended plenty of executive meetings. This place is exceptional. Daniel simply nodded. It was designed that way. Gregory barely acknowledged Faith standing nearby. Instead, he assumed she had somehow wandered into the administrative area. "What are you doing here?" Faith answered calmly. "I have a meeting." Gregory smiled politely but dismissively. "Business seminar." "Something like that." He chuckled. "Good. Maybe you'll finally see how large hospitality companies actually operate." Faith looked at him quietly. "I hope so." The narrator already understood that Faith's answer contained far more truth than Gregory imagined. Nearby, Michael Reynolds watched the exchange from across the lobby. Sophia Bennett stood beside him. "Should someone intervene?" Michael shook his head. "No. Mrs. Cook hasn't given permission." Sophia lowered her voice. "I don't know how she stays so calm." Michael answered honestly, "Neither do I." Guests continued arriving. Gregory recognized several executives from industry conferences. He confidently introduced Tiffany whenever opportunities arose. "This is Tiffany Morgan, my colleague." No one questioned the description. No one challenged it. Most executives assumed she worked with him professionally. William Harris quietly observed those introductions from across the room. He said nothing. Observation remained more valuable than interruption. At exactly 9 o'clock, a uniformed conference coordinator approached the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, the executive governance session will begin in 5 minutes. She consulted her tablet. "Board members and authorized participants, please proceed to conference room A." Guests began walking toward the secure entrance. Gregory naturally joined them. No one stopped him. His invitation authorized entry into the opening presentation. That, too, had been carefully planned. Tiffany attempted to follow. The coordinator politely stepped in front of her. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This portion of the meeting is restricted." Tiffany looked confused. "I came with Mr. Walker." "I understand. However, attendance is limited to authorized individuals." Gregory turned back. "It's all right. I'll only be an hour." Tiffany smiled. "I'll wait." Linda nodded approvingly. "We'll have lunch afterward." Gregory walked through the security doors without another thought. Faith entered several steps behind him, still carrying the same modest leather portfolio, still attracting almost no attention. Inside conference room A, everything reflected disciplined professionalism. A polished walnut conference table stretched nearly 30 feet across the room. Large digital displays covered one wall. Individual nameplates had been arranged before each assigned seat. Pitchers of water, legal pads, encrypted voting tablets. Every detail had been prepared long before sunrise. Gregory glanced around the room with visible admiration. "This is impressive." He searched for an available chair. Near the middle of the table sat an empty seat labeled Guest Observer. Gregory smiled. Perfect. He sat down confidently. Across the room, several directors quietly exchanged curious glances, but said nothing. Daniel entered, carrying several thick binders. Michael followed. Independent auditors organized sealed evidence boxes near the presentation screens. William Harris finally walked into the room. Every board member immediately stood. Gregory noticed the reaction and rose, as well assuming it reflected ordinary respect for the chairman. William greeted several directors before his eyes briefly settled on Faith. Only for a second. A slight nod. Nothing more. Faith acknowledged him with the same restrained professionalism. Gregory remained unaware that the two people exchanging that almost invisible gesture had quietly approved nearly every major decision affecting the island for years. The meeting had not officially begun. Yet the foundation beneath Gregory's understanding of reality had already begun to shift. He simply had not realized it yet. Within minutes, the first agenda item would be announced. And with it, the carefully hidden truth that had remained invisible throughout the entire vacation would finally begin moving into the light. The conference room fell completely silent as the heavy doors closed. A discreet electronic lock engaged with a soft click. Outside, the executive conference center continued its normal operations. Guests walked through the gardens, golf carts carried visitors toward the marina, and Tiffany Morgan waited comfortably in a nearby lounge, convinced Gregory was attending an important business presentation that would further elevate his reputation. Inside Conference Room A, however, every person present understood that corporate governance had officially begun. Every conversation from that point forward would become part of the permanent legal record. Every vote would be documented, every presentation archived, every statement attributable. William Harris walked calmly toward the head of the conference table. He neither hurried nor attempted to command attention. He didn't need to. His reputation had already done that years earlier. When he reached his seat, he looked around the room with the practiced patience of a man who had chaired hundreds of board meetings. "Good morning." Several directors answered together. "Good morning." William nodded. "Thank you all for traveling to Seabrook Island for our annual governance session." He paused briefly. "I understand that many of you arrived late yesterday. I appreciate your commitment." Gregory listened with genuine interest. He recognized several hospitality executives seated around the table, but knew very few personally. He assumed he had been invited as an industry observer. Perhaps someone from Horizon Elite Travel had recommended him. The explanation seemed perfectly reasonable. Daniel Cook distributed thick binders to every participant. Each contained the meeting agenda, financial reports, governance resolutions, audit summaries, and legal certifications. Gregory accepted his copy gratefully. The cover carried only the corporate logo of Cook Coastal Holdings. The name meant little to him. Like many professionals in the hospitality industry, he knew the company only as a powerful investment group with holdings throughout the country. He had never researched its ownership. Few people ever had. That anonymity had always been intentional. William opened the meeting. The first several agenda items concerned standard governance matters: quarterly performance, operating revenue, environmental compliance, capital expenditures, employee retention. Board members reviewed charts projected onto the large display screens, while department executives summarized their reports. Gregory found the discussion fascinating. The resort's financial performance exceeded nearly every benchmark. Occupancy remained above 95%. Guest satisfaction had reached record levels. Employee turnover had fallen to the lowest level in company history. Net operating income had increased despite significant investment in conservation programs. He quietly admired whoever managed the company. They clearly understood both hospitality and long-term planning. What Gregory did not realize was that nearly every strategic decision being presented had first appeared months earlier inside confidential reports that Faith personally reviewed. The woman sitting only 6 seats away from him had approved funding for shoreline restoration, approved employee housing improvements, approved executive hiring, approved expansion delays to protect marine ecosystems. She listened to each presentation without interruption. Not because she lacked authority, because she preferred hearing complete information before speaking. William finally reached the final slide of the operational review. He closed the folder in front of him. "Thank you. The operational results have been accepted." He looked toward Daniel. "Mr. Cook." Daniel stood. As required under corporate governance procedures, the annual independent legal certification has also been completed. He briefly summarized compliance findings. No unresolved litigation, no regulatory violations, no accounting discrepancies. Everything appeared exceptionally well managed. Gregory nodded quietly. Impressive. Very impressive. Then Daniel reached the final page. There is one remaining governance matter before we proceed to strategic planning. William nodded. Please continue. Daniel looked around the room. As everyone here understands, Cook Coastal Holdings operates under a private ownership structure. Several directors nodded. Gregory continued listening politely. Daniel spoke with measured precision. Although day-to-day executive authority has been delegated appropriately, ultimate ownership remains vested in the beneficiary of the Cook Family Trust. Gregory paid little attention. He assumed the owner lived somewhere overseas. Perhaps an elderly investor. Perhaps a reclusive billionaire. The identity hardly seemed relevant. Daniel continued. In accordance with trust requirements, ownership authority must be formally acknowledged during each annual governance session. William folded his hands. Proceed. Daniel closed one binder and opened another. Inside rested several original legal documents, protected within transparent archival sleeves. The original trust documentation has been independently verified. The ownership certificates have been authenticated. The banking authorizations remain current. The board resolutions remain valid. The beneficiary retains full controlling interest. Everything still sounded procedural. Gregory glanced briefly toward the windows overlooking the ocean. His attention wandered. He had no reason to believe the next few minutes would affect him personally. William looked toward the far end of the conference table. Mrs. Cook. The room became still. Gregory instinctively looked around. Surely another Mrs. Cook attended the meeting. Perhaps a director he had overlooked. William repeated calmly, Mrs. Faith Cook. Faith slowly closed her notebook. She stood. No dramatic music, no theatrical pause, no triumphant expression. Simply stood. Every board member immediately rose to their feet. One after another, Michael Reynolds stood. Daniel Cook stood. Independent auditors stood. Senior executives stood. Even outside legal counsel rose respectfully. Within seconds, every person in the room remained standing. Except Gregory. He looked around in complete confusion. His eyes moved from William to Daniel, to Michael, and finally settled on Faith, his wife, standing quietly beside the conference table. Gregory frowned. What? No one answered. William spoke instead. Let the official record reflect that Faith Cook, sole beneficiary of the Cook Family Trust and ultimate owner of Cook Coastal Holdings, is present. The corporate secretary typed the statement into the permanent minutes. William continued. The board formally acknowledges Mrs. Cook's attendance. Only then did he look toward Faith. Good morning, Madam Owner. Faith answered with the same calm voice she had used throughout the vacation. Good morning. Gregory slowly pushed his chair backward. No. The word escaped almost involuntarily. This? He looked toward Daniel. There's some mistake. Daniel met his eyes professionally. There is no mistake. Gregory laughed nervously. This isn't funny. Nobody laughed with him. William spoke gently rather than harshly. Mr. Walker, you were invited today because certain circumstances required transparency. Gregory shook his head. My wife. He looked at Faith again. She. Words failed him. He searched desperately for some explanation that fit the reality he believed. Faith worked from home. Faith dressed simply. Faith never discussed investments. Faith drove an ordinary car. Faith never attended glamorous events. None of that matched the room surrounding him. William opened another folder. For the record, he lifted an embossed certificate. The Cook Family Trust currently holds 100% controlling ownership of Cook Coastal Holdings. Another document followed. Cook Coastal Holdings owns Seabrook Island Grand Resort through its hospitality division. Another. Mrs. Faith Cook has served as sole beneficiary and controlling owner for the past 5 years. Daniel stepped forward with additional certified copies. Each document has been independently authenticated. Gregory stared blankly. His breathing became noticeably shallow. He turned toward Faith. You? She simply looked back at him. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no anger, only quiet composure. You own... He couldn't finish the sentence. Faith answered softly. Yes. Gregory looked around the room again. Michael Reynolds lowered his head respectfully toward Faith. Only then did Gregory remember every strange moment since arriving. Michael's unusual hesitation, Sophia's discreet behavior, the permanently reserved villa, the untouched dining terrace, the staff who had seemed strangely careful whenever Faith was nearby. None of it had been coincidence. William continued speaking. As chairman, I also wish to formally thank Mrs. Cook for another year of responsible stewardship. Her commitment to employee welfare, environmental preservation, and long-term financial stability has positioned this company among the most respected hospitality organizations in the country. Several board members nodded in agreement. One director added quietly, "Hear, hear." Gregory barely heard any of it. Fragments of the past week rushed through his mind with unbearable clarity. He had demanded another guest surrender the presidential villa. Faith had quietly given it to him. He had asked her to leave the gala. She had left without argument. He had repeatedly praised Tiffany while ignoring his wife. All of it. Inside her own resort. Inside property she legally owned. He suddenly remembered saying something else. One sentence. Spoken confidently on the balcony only days earlier. One day I'll own a place like this. The memory struck harder than any accusation. Faith had heard it. She had said nothing. William allowed several moments of silence before continuing. The meeting will now proceed to legal verification of ownership documentation and governance authority. Gregory slowly lowered himself back into his chair. For the first time in years, he no longer felt important. He no longer felt admired. He no longer felt certain of anything. Across the room, Faith calmly reopened her notebook. The board meeting continued exactly as scheduled. Not because anyone wished to embarrass Gregory, but because corporations did not pause for disbelief. Facts remained facts. Documents remained documents. And truth once formally entered into the record no longer required anyone's permission to exist. No one spoke for several long seconds after William Harris concluded the formal acknowledgement. The silence carried none of the excitement often associated with dramatic revelations. Instead, it carried the weight of legal certainty. Every person seated around the conference table understood that what had just occurred was not an announcement designed to surprise. It was a required corporate procedure. Ownership had not changed that morning. It had existed for years. Only Gregory Walker had been unaware of it. William looked toward the corporate secretary. "Please note the time of acknowledgement." The secretary typed calmly. "Recorded?" William nodded. "Proceed with legal verification." Daniel Cook stood once more. Unlike television dramas, corporate ownership was never established through speeches or emotional declarations. It was established through documentation. He placed the first certified binder onto the center of the conference table. Exhibit 1. The Cook Family Trust. Inside rested the original trust agreement signed by Richard Cook years before his death. Each page bore official notarizations, court registration numbers, trustee certifications, independent legal opinions. Daniel opened the document to the final amendment. The trust names one surviving beneficiary. He looked toward Faith. Faith Elizabeth Cook. He then handed copies to the independent auditors. The auditors examined the seals carefully. One compared them with digital authentication records. Another verified registration numbers against secure databases already loaded onto encrypted laptops. Several minutes passed without interruption. Finally, the lead auditor spoke. Authentic. Daniel nodded. The record will reflect independent verification. Gregory watched in complete disbelief. No one appeared to be performing. No one exaggerated. No one looked toward him. Every participant simply continued doing the work required by corporate governance. That frightened him far more than anger would have. Anger could be argued against. Facts could not. Daniel opened another binder. Exhibit 2. Ownership structure. The large display screens illuminated with an intricate corporate diagram. Holding companies, investment entities, hospitality subsidiaries, property management corporations, transportation services, insurance structures. Everything ultimately converged toward one final box. Cook Family Trust. Beneficiary Faith Elizabeth Cook. Gregory leaned forward. I've never heard of any of this. Daniel answered professionally. The ownership structure has never been confidential. It has simply never been publicized. William added calmly, Our shareholders have always preferred privacy. Gregory looked toward Faith. You never told me. Faith met his eyes. You never asked. The sentence contained no accusation, only truth. Gregory searched desperately for another explanation. I would have remembered. Faith answered gently. I never lied. Again, silence settled across the room. Gregory replayed years of conversations inside his mind. Faith had often mentioned board meetings, investment reviews, legal documents, property inspections. He had dismissed them. He assumed she meant volunteer organizations, small investments, routine paperwork. He had never listened carefully enough to ask another question. The realization hurt more than surprise. He had not been deceived. He had simply never been interested. Daniel continued. Exhibit 3. He produced certified banking records. Several directors already possessed copies. The documents summarized authorization histories covering the previous 5 years. Every major capital expenditure, every acquisition, every environmental initiative, every executive appointment. Each approval carried the same digital authorization. Faith Cook. Gregory stared at the signatures projected onto the screen. He recognized them immediately. He had watched Faith sign birthday cards, mortgage paperwork, tax returns, school donation letters. The handwriting was unmistakable. One board member quietly spoke. Mrs. Cook approved the Coastal Restoration Initiative. Another added, and employee housing. A third smiled. The scholarship expansion program as well. Michael Reynolds looked toward Gregory for the first time since the meeting began. I've worked for Mrs. Cook's family for 14 years. My greatest professional privilege has been carrying out her decisions. Gregory slowly turned toward him. You knew. Michael answered honestly. Yes. You greeted me at the dock. I greeted every guest. You knew I was her husband. I did. And you never... Michael chose his words carefully. Mrs. Cook instructed every employee to treat you exactly like every other guest. Gregory lowered his eyes. Suddenly, every interaction during the vacation looked different. The porter, the concierge, the maitre d', Sophia. None of them had been confused. They had simply honored Faith's wishes. William continued guiding the meeting. Mr. Cook. Daniel opened another folder. Exhibit 4. Electronic authorization records. Large screens displayed encrypted approval logs, dates, times, secure authentication certificates. Every significant investment decision over 5 years. One after another. Gregory recognized several projects. The marina expansion, the new conference center, the marine biology partnership, the employee healthcare initiative. Industry publications had praised those decisions repeatedly. He had admired the anonymous executive responsible for them. He now realized that executive had been eating breakfast across the table from him for years, without once seeking recognition. Daniel continued. Each authorization has been independently validated by our cybersecurity auditors. The lead technology auditor confirmed. No irregularities. Authentication complete. Gregory spoke quietly. Faith? She turned toward him. You were doing all this? Yes. Every year? Yes. And you never? She finished the sentence for him. Felt the need to announce it. His shoulders slowly slumped. For the first time, Gregory truly understood how little he had known about the woman he married. Not because she had hidden herself, because he had stopped seeing her. William allowed another brief pause before signaling Daniel again. Continue. Daniel produced another binder. Exhibit 5. Board communications. Several years of confidential emails appeared on screen. Every message concerned company operations, budget approvals, legal consultations, environmental policy, employee welfare. Faith's replies remained remarkably consistent. Brief, professional, thoughtful, never emotional, never impulsive. One director smiled. Mrs. Cook usually answers before sunrise. Another nodded. I've received emails from her at 5:30 in the morning. Michael quietly added, she personally reads employee satisfaction reports. Gregory blinked. Employee reports? Michael looked surprised by the question. Every quarter, she insists on reviewing anonymous staff feedback herself. Gregory remembered something suddenly. Years earlier, he had complained because Faith always woke early. He had joked that she treated mornings like business meetings. She hadn't laughed. She had actually been attending business meetings, just not the kind he imagined. William folded his hands. Before moving to the compliance review, does any director question the validity of the ownership record? One after another, directors answered. No. 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 The corporate secretary entered the unanimous confirmation into the minutes. Ownership officially stood beyond dispute. Not that it had ever been uncertain. Now it had simply been reaffirmed. Gregory closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, he looked toward Faith. I'm sorry. The words emerged almost automatically. Faith regarded him calmly. This meeting isn't about apologies. William gently supported her statement. Mr. Walker, today's purpose is governance. Personal matters remain outside board jurisdiction. Gregory nodded slowly. For perhaps the first time in his professional life, he understood the difference between personal emotion and institutional responsibility. The board had not gathered to humiliate him. They had gathered because annual governance required their presence. His own actions had merely become impossible to separate from the circumstances surrounding the meeting. Daniel organized the verified documents into new archival folders. Ownership verification complete. William acknowledged the report. "Thank you." He then looked toward Ethan Brooks, Chief Legal Officer. "Mr. Brooks, the compliance review, please." Ethan stood carrying a separate case marked with a blue security seal. Unlike every folder opened so far, this one had not been distributed to directors in advance. Gregory noticed the difference immediately. Ethan placed the sealed case onto the table. "With the chair's permission, compliance has prepared additional material requiring board review." William nodded once. "Proceed." Ethan carefully broke the security seal. Inside rested several organized evidence files, emails, photographs, reservation records, internal reports, video archive references, witness statements. Gregory's heartbeat quickened. He recognized his own name printed across the cover page. The room remained perfectly silent. No one looked pleased, no one looked eager. Every face reflected the same professional seriousness. Faith quietly folded her hands together. She had never requested this investigation. She had never instructed anyone to build a case against Gregory. The company had simply followed its own compliance procedures. And now, exactly as policy required, those procedures were about to continue. Fan 13. The board meeting concluded shortly before noon. No dramatic announcements echoed through the conference center. No security officers escorted anyone from the building. No one applauded. The corporate secretary simply collected the final voting records. The independent auditors sealed their verification documents, and the directors exchanged brief professional farewells before leaving for scheduled committee sessions. Business had been conducted. Corporate governance had followed its course. Everything else belonged outside the boardroom. Gregory Walker remained seated long after most participants had left. The leather binder containing the meeting agenda still lay open in front of him, though he was no longer reading it. His eyes rested on the company logo embossed across the cover. Cook Coastal Holdings. He had spent years working within the luxury travel industry. He had admired the company from a distance. He had praised its management in professional conferences. He had even cited Seabrook Island Grand Resort as an example of disciplined leadership during presentations to clients. All that time, he had never realized that the person responsible for many of those decisions had been waiting for him at home every evening. Not because she had hidden, because he had never cared enough to ask. Daniel Cook quietly approached. "Mr. Walker." Gregory looked up slowly. "I assume this is where you ask me to leave?" Daniel shook his head. "The conference center remains open. You are free to remain until the session officially closes." Gregory gave a tired smile. "Everyone here is more gracious than I deserve." Daniel answered honestly. "Grace and procedure are not the same thing." Gregory nodded. "I understand that now." Daniel gathered several legal folders. "Mrs. Cook asked me to speak with you." Gregory's heart lifted for the first time that day. "She wants to see me." Daniel paused. "She wishes all future legal discussions regarding your marriage to be handled through counsel." The hope disappeared almost instantly. Gregory lowered his eyes. "So, she doesn't want to talk." Daniel chose his words carefully. "She believes important conversations deserve clarity. And attorneys provide that clarity." There was no hostility in Daniel's voice, only professionalism. Somehow that made the truth harder to hear. Outside the conference center, Tiffany Morgan waited in the executive lounge overlooking the gardens. She had spent nearly 3 hours wondering why Gregory's meeting had lasted so long. Each passing minute increased her curiosity. When she finally saw him walking toward the entrance, she immediately noticed something different. His shoulders were lower, his steps slower, his expression almost empty. She hurried toward him. "There you are." "What happened?" Gregory looked at her but did not answer. "Were they offering you a partnership?" Still nothing. Tiffany laughed nervously. "Don't tell me they recruited you." Gregory closed his eyes briefly. "No." "What then?" He looked toward the gardens. "Faith owns the resort." Tiffany blinked. "What?" "The entire island." She stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "I mean exactly what I said. Faith owns everything." Tiffany searched his face, waiting for the punchline. None came. She laughed again. "That's impossible." "It isn't?" "Gregory, I just spent 3 hours watching lawyers prove it." The color slowly drained from Tiffany's face. "No. They showed ownership records, trust documents, bank authorizations, board resolutions. They've existed for years." Tiffany stepped backward. "So," she struggled to complete the thought. "The villa? Her. The board meeting? Her. The executives? They all work for her." Silence stretched between them. For the first time since the affair began, Tiffany truly understood the scale of what had happened. She had spent an entire week behaving like the future lady of a resort whose real owner had quietly wished her a pleasant stay. Linda Walker arrived moments later carrying shopping bags from the resort boutiques. "There you are." She smiled until she saw Gregory's face. "What happened?" Gregory answered quietly. "Mom." "Faith owns Seabrook." Linda frowned. "What? The island? The company? The resort? Everything?" Linda stared at him. Then she looked toward Tiffany, then back again. "What nonsense is this?" "It isn't. They proved it." Linda shook her head repeatedly. "No." "I would have known." Gregory almost laughed. "No, you wouldn't." "None of us knew." Linda whispered, "Faith." "My Faith," Gregory corrected her gently. "No, my wife." The distinction struck both of them. They had spent years defining Faith only by her relationship to Gregory. They had never considered that Gregory's place in her life represented only a very small part of who she actually was. Meanwhile, Faith sat alone inside a quiet meeting room overlooking the marina. The formal board session had ended. Only one final meeting remained. Daniel entered carrying a slim blue folder. "The governance session has officially concluded." Faith nodded. "And compliance. They'll continue according to policy. No changes." "None." Faith accepted the folder. Inside rested only 2 documents. The first summarized the board's resolutions. The second was considerably more personal, prepared by the family law firm weeks before the vacation. A petition for dissolution of marriage, unsigned. Faith had requested it after discovering Gregory's affair months earlier. Not because she wished to punish him, because trust once broken repeatedly could not be restored simply by pretending nothing had happened. Daniel spoke quietly. "You don't have to decide today." Faith looked out toward the ocean. "I made the decision before we came here." Daniel understood. The vacation didn't change anything. It only confirmed it. Faith closed the folder. "I hoped I was mistaken." "You weren't." Later that afternoon, Gregory stood outside Villa 12. The modest residence suddenly looked different, not because the building had changed, because his understanding had. He knocked softly. Several seconds passed before the door opened. Faith stood before him, still wearing the same charcoal business suit from the board meeting. Neither surprised nor angry, simply composed. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. Of course. The villa remained neat as always. Documents rested in organized stacks on the dining table. A laptop displayed financial reports. Fresh tea waited untouched beside the window. Gregory looked around slowly. How long what? How long have you owned all this? 5 years. And you never told me. Faith answered calmly. I mentioned board meetings. You said you had investment reviews. I assumed you weren't interested. Gregory sat down heavily. I thought... He stopped. What did you think? That you handled small family investments? Faith nodded slightly. I know. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Gregory spoke again. I'm sorry. Faith listened. I betrayed you? Yes. I embarrassed you? Yes. I treated you like... He could not finish. Faith completed nothing for him. Some sentences belonged to the person speaking them. I don't expect forgiveness. Faith remained quiet. I only wanted to tell you. He swallowed. That everything they're saying in that boardroom is true. I never deserved the way you treated me. Faith folded her hands. Gregory? He looked up. My decision isn't based on this week. He frowned. It's based on many years. She continued gently. Not one insult. Not one affair. Not one conversation. It's the pattern. The slow disappearance of respect. Gregory lowered his head. He knew she was right. The affair had not destroyed the marriage by itself. It had simply revealed how long respect had already been gone. Faith opened the blue folder Daniel had delivered earlier. She slid it across the table. Gregory looked down. The title read, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. He closed his eyes. You prepared this before the vacation? Yes. You already knew. I knew enough. He looked at her one final time. So this is goodbye? Faith answered softly. This is the beginning of an honest ending. Gregory signed nothing. Faith asked for nothing. The folder remained unopened between them like a quiet acknowledgement that some decisions no longer required arguments. Outside waves continued breaking gently against the shore. Inside, two people who had once imagined growing old together sat in complete silence. Neither hated the other. Neither raised a voice. Yet both understood that some distances could no longer be crossed, not because of anger, but because trust had already drifted too far out to sea. The days following the board meeting unfolded with remarkable quiet. No rumors spread through the resort. No headlines appeared in business publications. No guests noticed anything unusual beyond the steady rhythm of a luxury vacation coming to its natural end. That discretion was no accident. For decades, Cook Coastal Holdings had maintained one guiding principle during difficult situations. Protect the institution. Respect the people. Follow the law. Faith Cook had inherited that philosophy long before she inherited the company. She had no intention of abandoning it now. 3 weeks after returning to the mainland, the formal legal process began. Not in a crowded courtroom. Not through emotional confrontations. Inside the offices of Whitmore and Ellis Family Law, two attorneys exchanged carefully prepared documents across a polished conference table. Faith attended with Daniel Cook and her family attorney, Rebecca Whitmore. Gregory arrived with his own legal counsel. The atmosphere remained professional. No reporters waited outside. No relatives filled the room. Only the people whose presence was legally necessary. Rebecca opened the meeting. As agreed, today's purpose is to review the petition for dissolution of marriage and discuss financial disclosures. Gregory quietly nodded. I understand. Faith simply acknowledged the statement. The attorneys began reviewing documents one by one. Marriage certificate, financial disclosures, property schedules, retirement accounts, insurance policies. Every page reflected months of preparation rather than days of anger. Rebecca finally opened another folder. The prenuptial agreement. Gregory lowered his eyes. He remembered signing it nearly 10 years earlier. At the time, he had barely read the document. Faith had explained that her late father wanted to protect long-standing family investments. Gregory had laughed. I don't have enough money to worry about. Richard Cook had smiled politely. It isn't about today's money. It's about tomorrow's responsibilities. Gregory had signed without another question. Now those words returned with painful clarity. Rebecca summarized the agreement. Personal assets acquired before marriage remained separate property. Family trusts remained excluded from marital distribution. Corporate ownership held through the Cook Family Trust remained entirely outside the marital estate. Gregory's attorney carefully reviewed every clause. Finally, he looked toward his client. The agreement appears valid. Gregory answered quietly, I know. No objections followed. There were none to make. The financial disclosures required considerably more time. Faith had voluntarily disclosed every asset required under state law. Nothing hidden, nothing exaggerated, nothing omitted. Gregory studied the documents silently. He recognized only a fraction of the investment companies listed. Many existed solely to manage environmental projects, hospitality operations, or charitable foundations. Rebecca explained patiently. Mrs. Cook has elected to disclose additional information beyond the legal minimum in the interest of complete transparency. Gregory looked toward Faith. You didn't have to do that. She answered calmly. I wanted the process to remain uncomplicated. He nodded. That sounded exactly like her. After a brief recess discussion, shifted toward the marital residence. Gregory spoke first. I'll move out. Rebecca looked toward Faith. She nodded. The house should be sold. Gregory looked surprised. You don't want it? Faith smiled faintly. It stopped feeling like home long before this process began. No one argued. The attorneys simply made notes. Sometimes the most painful decisions required the fewest words. Over the following month, legal negotiations progressed steadily. Neither side delayed paperwork. Neither side attempted procedural games. Court filings arrived on schedule. Financial statements were exchanged promptly. Deadlines were met. Even the mediator assigned by the court remarked privately that few divorces proceeded with such professionalism. The explanation remained simple. Neither party fought over money. The real loss had occurred long before lawyers became involved. Meanwhile, Cook Coastal Holdings continued operating normally. The annual compliance investigation reached its conclusion. Ethan Brooks presented the final report to the board. After reviewing all evidence, the findings remained measured. Gregory had exaggerated professional influence. He had inaccurately represented his relationship with the resort. His conduct created unnecessary reputational risk. However, investigators found no evidence that he had received financial benefit from those statements. No fraud, no theft, no criminal conduct, only repeated misrepresentation. William Harris approved the recommendations. Cook Coastal Holdings would send a formal notice to Horizon Elite Travel, clarifying that Gregory had never possessed authority to represent the company. No further action would be requested. Faith approved the recommendation immediately. She refused to seek additional penalties. The purpose of compliance, she reminded the board, is to protect the company, not to settle personal grievances. The directors unanimously agreed. Several weeks later, Horizon Elite Travel completed its own internal review. Gregory met privately with senior executives. He told them everything before they asked. The affair, the board meeting, the compliance findings, the inaccurate statements. No one raised their voice. His employer appreciated one thing above all else: honesty. After reviewing the facts, the company concluded that Gregory's credibility with several luxury partners had been compromised. He resigned voluntarily before disciplinary proceedings became necessary. His supervisor shook his hand before he left. "I hope you find your way forward." Gregory answered honestly. "So do I." Life on Seabrook Island also continued changing. Faith visited the resort again 2 months later. This time, she arrived openly. Employees gathered quietly near the administration building. Not because she requested a ceremony, because many had worked under the Cook family for decades. Michael Reynolds greeted her first. "Welcome back." Faith smiled warmly. "It's good to be here." Sophia Bennett approached next. "We've missed you." Faith laughed softly. "I've only been away a few weeks." It felt longer. Inside the executive conference room, Faith reviewed several personnel recommendations. The first document carried Michael's name. Promotion to Regional Chief Operating Officer. Approved. The second carried Sophia's. Vice President of Guest Experience. Approved. William Harris smiled as she signed both approvals. "They've earned it." Faith nodded. "They've served with integrity." Another report recognized Carlos Hernandez and several long-time maintenance employees who had consistently followed reporting procedures during the vacation. Each received additional compensation and expanded educational benefits for their families. Not because they had reported Gregory, because they had honored company policy honestly and professionally. Faith believed integrity deserved recognition long before crises appeared. Later that afternoon, she toured the island on foot. Many employees stopped briefly to greet her. Housekeepers, gardeners, dock workers, chefs, maintenance crews. She knew many by name. Not because someone prepared briefing notes, because she had spent years learning them. Carlos smiled as she approached the botanical gardens. "My granddaughter starts college next month." Faith's eyes brightened. "Engineering." He nodded proudly. "Full scholarship." "I'm happy for her." Carlos shook his head gently. "She wouldn't have this opportunity without your family's education program." Faith smiled. "She earned it." Carlos watched her continue walking through the gardens. Richard Cook had often done exactly the same thing. Walking instead of riding. Listening instead of speaking. Observing instead of announcing. The island had changed owners years earlier. Yet its spirit had remained remarkably unchanged. That evening, Faith stood alone on the balcony of the presidential villa. The same villa she had quietly surrendered during the vacation. The ocean stretched endlessly before her. The setting sun painted the horizon with deep shades of orange and gold. She thought briefly about Gregory, not with anger, not with satisfaction, simply with acceptance. Some stories ended because people stopped loving one another. Others ended because one person stopped respecting the other. The second wound often healed much more slowly. Behind her, the resort prepared for another season. Guests would arrive. Employees would welcome them. Families would celebrate anniversaries. Children would build sandcastles along the beach. Life would continue exactly as it always had. And Faith intended to ensure that it continued with the same quiet integrity her father had entrusted to her years before. Fan 15. 6 months passed with surprising speed. Summer gave way to early autumn, and Seabrook Island entered another successful season. Guests continued arriving from around the world. Business conferences filled the executive calendar. Families returned for annual vacations. Wedding ceremonies once again transformed the western beach into a place where promises were made beneath the sound of gentle waves. For most visitors, nothing had changed. For the people who worked there every day, however, quiet changes had reshaped the future of the resort. Faith Cook had never attempted to become the public face of the company. She still declined magazine interviews. She still avoided social media. She still preferred walking through the property with department supervisors rather than standing behind podiums. Her philosophy remained unchanged. A company should be recognized for how it treats people, not for how loudly its owner speaks. That belief gradually influenced every level of the organization. Employee turnover reached another historic low. The education fund established by Richard Cook expanded to include vocational training for hospitality workers and full university scholarships for employees' children. Healthcare benefits improved. New family housing was completed for staff members who had spent years commuting long distances. Faith approved every initiative after carefully reviewing budgets with Daniel Cook and the executive team. Whenever directors praised her leadership during quarterly meetings, she answered almost the same way. "We invest in people first. The numbers usually follow." The directors had stopped being surprised by that answer. Experience had proven she was right. Environmental projects also became one of Faith's highest priorities. The island had always been beautiful. She wanted to ensure it remained beautiful long after she was gone. Working alongside marine biologists and environmental organizations, the resort expanded coral restoration programs, reduced single-use plastics throughout the property, and increased protection for nesting sea turtles along the eastern shoreline. Local fishing communities became partners rather than competitors. Nearby schools regularly visited the island to participate in conservation workshops sponsored by the Cook Foundation. Faith often attended those programs quietly. Children rarely knew she owned the resort. To them, she was simply the woman who asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully when they described what they had learned. She preferred it that way. One afternoon, Michael Reynolds joined her for a routine property inspection. They walked together along the marina, where the entire story had quietly begun months earlier. Michael smiled. "The dock looks different now." Faith looked across the water. "No, it feels different." He nodded thoughtfully. "I suppose you're right." After several moments of silence, Michael asked the question he had wondered about for months. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "When Gregory demanded the presidential villa?" Faith smiled faintly. "Why did I let him have it?" Michael nodded. "Yes." She looked toward the horizon before answering. "If I had refused, he would have believed the villa mattered." Michael listened quietly. What mattered was seeing whether respect still existed. And Faith's smile faded gently. It didn't. Michael understood. The villa had never been the real issue. It had simply revealed something that had already been true. Across the country, Gregory Walker's life looked very different. After leaving Horizon Elite Travel, he accepted a position with a much smaller regional tourism company. The salary was lower, the responsibilities less prestigious. For the first time in years, almost no one recognized his name. Oddly enough, the quieter life forced him to confront parts of himself that success had allowed him to ignore. He no longer blamed Faith. He no longer blamed Tiffany. He no longer blamed circumstances. The responsibility belonged to him. Occasionally, he thought about the vacation. Not the board meeting, not the ownership documents, the smaller moments. Faith carrying her own suitcase while he insisted someone help Tiffany first. Faith quietly giving up the presidential villa without complaint. Faith leaving the gala after he asked her to go. Those memories remained more painful than the legal proceedings, because they reminded him that every opportunity to choose differently had existed. He had simply chosen poorly. Tiffany Morgan also disappeared from Gregory's life. Their relationship survived only a few weeks after the divorce process began. Without secrecy, excitement, or imagined futures, they discovered they shared very little beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. Their final conversation ended without anger, only disappointment. Each quietly walked in a different direction. Neither attempted to contact the other again. Linda Walker changed as well. Age often teaches lessons, pride refuses to learn. Several months after the divorce became final, she wrote Faith a handwritten letter. Not to ask forgiveness, not to rebuild the past, simply to acknowledge the truth. She admitted she had judged Faith according to appearances rather than character. She admitted she had mistaken quietness for weakness. Most importantly, she admitted she had encouraged Gregory's worst instincts instead of challenging them. Faith read the letter twice. Then she placed it inside a drawer. She never replied. Not because she remained angry, because some acknowledgments needed no response. The letter itself had already completed its purpose. On a crisp October morning, the board of directors gathered once again at Seabrook Island. Unlike the dramatic meeting months earlier, this session lasted only 2 hours. Quarterly revenue exceeded expectations. Environmental projects continued ahead of schedule. Guest satisfaction reached another record. William Harris closed the meeting with a smile. Mrs. Cook. Faith looked up. "I believe your father would be extraordinarily proud." She paused before answering. "I hope he'd be proud of the people." William smiled. "I think that's exactly what he would say." After the meeting, Faith walked alone to the western beach. The same place where the gala had taken place. The same place where Gregory had asked her to leave. The wooden dance floor had already been removed after the season ended. Only smooth sand remained. Waves washed away every footprint almost as soon as it appeared. She stood quietly for several minutes, not remembering the humiliation, remembering the clarity. That evening had not broken her marriage. It had simply revealed that the marriage had already broken long before anyone noticed. The ocean had not changed. She had. Not by becoming stronger. She had always been strong. By finally allowing herself to stop carrying a relationship that only one person had been trying to protect. She slipped off her shoes and walked barefoot along the shoreline. The wind carried the familiar scent of salt water. Seagulls drifted overhead. Somewhere behind her, resort employees prepared another welcome reception for arriving guests. Life continued, exactly as life always does. The narrator had known from the beginning that this story would never end with revenge. True strength rarely needed revenge. Gregory was not destroyed by Faith. He was confronted by the consequences of his own choices. The board did not punish him because he had been an unfaithful husband. They fulfilled their duty because documented facts required professional review. Faith never demanded public humiliation. She never celebrated his losses. She simply allowed truth to follow its proper path through evidence procedure and law. Perhaps that was why the ending carried no triumph. Only peace. Some victories are loud enough for crowds to celebrate. Others are so quiet that only the person who lived through them can fully understand. Faith Cook left Seabrook Island that afternoon exactly as she had arrived months earlier. Without an entourage, without photographers, without announcing who she was, The ferry slowly pulled away from the dock as employees waved goodbye. She returned the gesture with a warm smile. The island became smaller against the horizon. Its beaches, villas, and gardens gradually disappeared into the distance. Yet the lesson she carried with her remained perfectly clear. Titles can be hidden. Wealth can be concealed. Power can remain invisible. Character cannot. Sooner or later, every choice leaves a record. And in the end, it is never the size of a person's fortune that defines their legacy. It is the quiet dignity with which they choose to use it. When a story ends without shouting, it often stays with us longer. Faith's journey was never about proving that wealth could defeat betrayal. It was about showing that integrity does not need an audience to remain powerful. She never answered humiliation with humiliation. She trusted patience over impulse evidence over accusation and lawful process over personal revenge. In doing so, she protected not only her own dignity, but also the values her father had entrusted to her. Gregory's story reminds us that respect is rarely lost in a single moment. It fades through countless small choices moments when we stop listening, stop noticing, or begin believing that someone else's quietness means they have nothing left to teach us. By the time he understood who Faith truly was, the greatest loss was not the marriage, the resort, or the career he left behind. It was the realization that he had overlooked the extraordinary person beside him for years. If this story gave you something to reflect on, perhaps share where you're watching from and what part stayed with you the most. Your thoughts often become part of the conversation that continues long after the final scene. And if stories about quiet courage, justice, and the strength of dignity resonate with you, a simple like or subscription helps this community continue growing. Thank you for spending your time here, and I hope to see you again in the next story.